I decided to do a vintage video today where I just take an article, read it, and comment it along with you guys. And I looked upon Yahoo News with Pope Francis backing a new movement to redefine capitalism as a force for good. Oh, I am so glad that finally the Pope is intervening in economics. The guy sitting on the golden throne at the Vatican is going to lecture us little people about economics, you know? And no better Pope to do it than the Pope that just happens to be a socialist and agrees with a lot of Marxists from around the world, never criticizes China, ever, but criticizes the United States. It's like listening to an arsonist on how to better have fire safety for your building. And by the way, aren't we supposed to listen to the experts? The experts, which are the new priests of 2020. What exactly is the Pope an expert on when it comes to economics? But here's a very interesting take, which a lot of people don't seem to know. There aren't, as far as I know, and I might be wrong, but there aren't any capitalist nations in 2020. Even the United States considers itself to be a mixed economy. Welfare, social programs are not inherently capitalistic. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing either. But what I do want to point out is that in a capitalist system, you wouldn't have welfare. So there are mixed economies, and then there are authoritarian hellholes. Why do I know there are authoritarian hellholes? Because the people vote with their feet. People simply move away from socialist or theocratic nations, and they go towards mixed economies. There are a few exceptions, of course, the Vatican being one, but that's like a country that's so small, it doesn't really matter. Though, as a person living in Europe, I want to say a mixed economy is a good economy. That's just my thoughts. You know, so when they say it's like make capitalism as a force for good, like what? Does he want to get rid of the welfare system so he can bring about capitalism? Is this what the Pope is talking about? But anyway, capitalism has been condemned for many of the world's evils. Yeah, by Marxists and Nazis. Like Hitler also condemned capitalism. And what is capitalism? Well, it's freedom. It's the ability to do business with whomever you want, and it's the ability to own your own property. And why is it a good thing? Well, because the people on the ground running the business know more about that business than the person from the government. And not only that, but they have a vested interest in that business working than some centralized authority that never even stepped foot into those people's business. So that is why capitalism is great. And another thing is that you need to see what happened before capitalism. Before capitalism, you would have never been able to have a banana in Romania. Because, believe it or not, back then, countries were hyper-xenophobic. Like, they wouldn't trade with each other. There was some small exceptions where people would trade with China, or you would have, like, some colony from the Indias trading with the United Kingdom. But all in all, you wouldn't have, like, this freedom of movement of goods, where the UK would buy stuff from Spain. It didn't exist back then. Unless it was like some very small exception. But it was definitely not the rule. In fact, this is what gave Adam Smith the idea to write his book. He noticed some smugglers trying to carry goods and risking their freedom by smuggling stuff from Spain all the way into the United Kingdom. And that's why it's like, well, why can't we just trade? Why do we have these ridiculous rules? I mean, it would be better off for everyone if people could trade their surplus and get something in return that they need. But anyway, right, just look at this nonsense over here. Capitalism has been condemned by many of the world's evil, from massive income inequality to climate change. Here's the problem that I have with this. Why isn't it being fact-checked by authoritarian fact-checkers? Why isn't China, a non-capitalist nation, considered to be part of the polluting problem? Did you notice that? I mean, you don't need to be an expert to look at some pictures from Chinese cities and go like, Jesus Christ, I don't want this here. I mean, we're talking about water that has the color of something you would see in a sci-fi movie, to places where you can't see the sunrise. And China is not a capitalist nation as far as I know. I mean, they're communists, right? Meanwhile, you have capitalist nations like America under Trump, which I understand, evil, horrible. Oh my God, he pulled from the Paris Agreement. And yet the pollution goes down under him. The carbon emissions go down. In Europe, capitalist nations, pollutions go down. It's really interesting how they just omit this. And then they talk about massive income inequality. It's like, okay, let's look at California or New York City or other places where people vote these critics of capitalism, these left-leaning individuals. And please explain to me, why is it that despite the fact that the people pay huge amounts of taxes, there's still massive wealth inequality? When is the Californian question going to be answered? Why is it that if people pay such exorbitant amounts in taxes and the living conditions that are incredibly expensive, people vote left-leaning governments, and yet massive income inequality? And then you have like Republican cities that are supposed to be like these horrible hellholes because they don't tax people until they bleed. And yet the income inequality isn't as great there. Why is that? Why aren't these people, like ever pulled to account? Like, did you notice this? Like the intellectuals, like the experts are in two categories, right? Like you have on one hand the expert that actually does things that you can see. Like for example, an engineer, he builds a building and you can see if the building collapses. And if the building collapses, the guy can get arrested. A doctor that botches a surgery, you can see that. He can be arrested for malpractice. He can lose his license. But when you have like an economist or a politician, an expert of this type that just has ideas, they don't really produce anything, they can have disastrous ideas that leads to mass homelessness, mass unemployment, like all these nasty stuff, and they're never being held to account. They're never being challenged on the fact like they can be in power for decades. And people are just going to go like, meh, we're just going to believe it. Maybe this time around he can finally fix the problem. Then they talk about, like the Pope talks about how avarice became coupled with capitalism in the late 1980s, fueled largely by Nobel Prize winner Milton Friedman's territory that the singular goal of capitalism is to maximize profits and shareholders and greed is good. Funny how they don't talk about social democrats. Like the whole idea behind social democrats is to increase the profits as much as humanly possible. Just pump the wealth. Just pump that wealth. Pump the wealth. And any tactic that they use is acceptable. So including bringing immigrants from other countries where Karl Marx in his Communist Manifesto also said that by bringing in Irish workers into England, they are hurting the English working class. And he's talking about the same nation, right? Like, probably Karl Marx would have spit in his grave if they would actually talk about importing immigrants from abroad and then mistreating them, because that's the thing. It's not like the people that are being brought in are given the American dream. No, they're being horribly mistreated. You know why? Because who are they going to complain to? If they start complaining and making a fuss, they get sent back, they get deported. And I know this not only because occasionally the papers write about it, but I know this because it's happening to Romanians. Romanians, they travel abroad, like for example to pick asparagus in Germany during a pandemic. And when they get there, they're being horribly mistreated. Like they're being paid less than they were agreed with. They're being forced to work more than 12 hours a day. All the working regulations are being discarded. They're not even given proper tools. Their hands start to bleed. Their ID cards were being confiscated so they can't leave the premise. And usually what the company does, and a lot of people don't understand, it's like, for example, when it comes to the fruit picking industry in the UK, why do you need to know Romanian or Bulgarian to work there? And it's very simple, because the company that operates the fruit picking, they have barracks on their grounds with beds. And they have food, right? So they have food and lodging. Now, if you hire a Romanian, he can't go home after work. So he's going to have to sleep in the barrack and he's going to have to eat from that farm. And what he eats plus the rent that he uses to sleep in gets deducted from his wage. So now he gets paid legally less than minimum wage. Because in reality, well, he gets paid minimum wage, but the money for the food and lodging gets deducted. So these companies can give all the bad fruits and all of the things that they wouldn't be able to sell, they can feed to the people working there, and they can also house the people working there and pay them less than minimum wage. Why do they not hire a British person? Well, because a British person wouldn't put up to that. He probably knows lawyers, he probably knows the people that are working from the press. They can create a scandal. Plus, they wouldn't sleep in the barrack anyway, and they wouldn't eat from that company, right? So this is why they prefer foreign workers. It's not to give them the British dream. And all of this is done, like all of this pumping the wealth and just exploiting people to maximum is being done so that the government can tax these companies as much as possible and then provide welfare to the people. So you get welfare and cheaper iPhones, okay? When someone says they're a social democrat, this is what they're supporting. They're supporting the maximum greed that humankind can ever imagine in order to pump as much wealth and then redistribute it by the government to the people. Okay, like look at California. That's pretty much what they want. But yeah, I mean, they're not going to criticize social democrats, no. And if you look at it, like most big businesses that should be right-wing, like for example, you see that the Pope is now in an alliance with the Bank of America, with MasterCard, with Visa, Salesforce, Johnson & Johnson, like all of these companies are forming a coalition with the Vatican as a new global alliance. All of these people are supporting social democrats. Like this is who they're funding. Okay, like social democrats is the new party of the elites and the rich. Because they're the ones benefiting the most from pumping the wealth. They're the ones benefiting the most from the human misery they create. And no one criticizes them. Why? Because they are the opposite. Like they're the left-leaning people. Like if you're a worker that doesn't like the fact that you're being oppressed by Amazon and you have to take a piss in a bottle because you can't even afford to go to the bathroom, you have the deadline, you have to work really hard in order to please the employer, well, then you need to be a leftist, right? You need to be a socialist because like, oh, fuck the corporations. The corporations are the ones that are pumping the ideology of socialism now. It's controlled opposition pretty much. Like if you were to have an actual classical Marxist, if you actually read Karl Marx's manifesto and you'd actually start spreading that ideology, like economic Marxism, they would freak out. They would probably ban you. Because here's the interesting part, right? These people are left-leaning on social issues, but very right-wing on economic issues. So yes, sure, Amazon is going to have a speech about Black Lives Matter, and they're going to say we have transgender bathrooms, and they're going to have all of these things. But at the end of the day, when it comes to economy and economic practices, they're going to behave like the most right-wing corporation. So again, it's like, okay, they have a transgender bathroom. Who cares if the transgender person can't get to piss in there? Because when they work at Amazon, they're being worked to the bone. And no one talks about these things. Like I look at leftist channels on YouTube, they rarely actually talk about these things. It's really why they love identity politics, because while they talk about important social issues and distractions, they're actually oppressing people. And there are things that can be done in order to stop that oppression, but like they don't want people to focus on that. Let's focus on the social issues. Andrew Yang actually said this on the television. He pointed out how like wherever he goes, when he meets a working class person, and he tells them that he's a Democrat, the working class person goes like, ugh. And he doesn't like that because the Democrats are supposed to be the party of the working class. But they've long abandoned the working class in favor of this new global alliance, the Bank of America, MasterCard, Salesforce, Johnson & Johnson, and so on and so forth. Rothschild's Foundation, these ones, they are the new left. Like the big interest groups are running left-leaning ideology across the Western world. And now you have like each organization has committed to changing aspects of its business model, which will be audited annually via a scorecard system. MasterCard, for instance, is committed to be more intentional about working with African Americans. So here's my question. Why doesn't someone at MasterCard get fired now? Because it's 2020. What stopped you from working with African Americans up till now. Like in 2019, you're telling me you haven't worked with African Americans properly and you're changing this in 2020? Well, someone needs to get fired. Yeah, and this is like what I say when every time I hear a company saying that they're going to be more inclusive in 2020. Like, who gets fired over this? Because you had so many years to be inclusive. If you're not inclusive up till today, then there's either malice or incompetence. Like, someone needs to get fired. Like in the case of Princeton University, where they openly admitted that for decades they've been racist. Who gets fired over this? I mean, there's no excuse. Like, seriously. You should have reached maximum inclusivity by 2020. Like, from now on, from this point forward, when a company says that they want to be more inclusive, well, it means they haven't been 100% inclusive, so someone needs to get fired. You know, replace the HR lady, replace the diversity officer, because they're incompetent. They just don't do their job properly. Man, like, just give me a couple of activists, you know? Like, this would be my dream, to have a couple of activists. And then, like, ask the questions, you know, send the emails to the companies. Like, why haven't you been inclusive up till now? How can you be more inclusive? Like, it's 2020 and you haven't been inclusive enough? Like, there was still room for more inclusivity? Who's to blame? Who gets fired over it? That's the normal and healthy thing that people would ask if they think for themselves, right? Because if they haven't, then they've been racist. There's no other explanation. You need to come up with a really good explanation to tell me it's like, okay, well, by 2020, we're deciding to be more inclusive. Well, what stopped you up till now? Like, what was the hurdle? What was the reason that in a corporation, you weren't achieving maximum inclusivity by today? So anyway, right, the coalition founder contends that the alliance isn't another caucus exclusive to big corporations. Any enterprise that believes in the need to reform the prevailing capitalist agenda can sign to be part of the movement. Really, I can sign to be part of the movement? It's available to the corner pharmacy who wants to make a commitment to hiring one person of color or being carbon neutral. What happens when you run out of people of color, though? Because, like, they're a minority in America, right? Like, if every company hires one, like, eventually you're going to run out of people of color. Like, what do you do then? No, like, legit question, though. Like, maybe this is why they haven't reached 100% inclusivity, huh? The market is just empty. There's no one else to hire. Like, they already hired all the people of color. Like, that would be a good excuse. I would accept that excuse. It's like, look, we're trying to reach maximum inclusivity, but gosh darn it, we can't just find anyone that's unemployed. And then I'd be like, oh, well, you know. Foster adds that through the leader of the Catholic Church serves as his main advisor, the coalition is firmly non-sectarian. This is, of course, informed by the Christian gospel, but it speaks about the Aristotle, which 300 years before talked about Christ's humanity's need to be responsible for each other. Yeah, I'm going to make a video debunking this ridiculous claim, suggesting that Christ is a socialist. I don't know why Christians don't do this. Like, why do I as an atheist need to come here and explain it to you? But, like, basically, you know, I don't see Christ up in the mountain speaking with his disciples, you know, after mass producing the fish, and saying, look, you have to be kind to each other, you have to be charitable. And then one of the disciples goes like, so what you're saying is that if we pay more taxes to the Roman Empire, then the Roman Empire can provide healthcare and food for its citizens? And then Jesus would go like, okay, let's start from the top. Tell me what I lost you. Yeah. You know, in fact, like, Jesus would probably be banned from Patreon for manifestable observable behavior. You know, when he went into the church and started whipping the merchants, holy shit, like, the ADL would have a fit about it. No, they would cancel Jesus. Like, I'm telling you, they would cancel Jesus for his behavior. Like, he would abuse all of the terms of service on social media. Jesus would not be allowed on social media. Not after the temple incident. It would be like every time the press writes about Jesus, it would be the temple guy. You know, Jesus Christ, far-right extremist who went with a whip in a temple. Real name, Messiah, real name Jesus Christ. I'm going to make another video about that. No, but it's funny. Like, think about it. Anyway, right, let me know what you think. I'll see you guys in the comment section. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please share it around. And I'll be talking with you guys. Take care.